At 75, I thought my golden years would be spent surrounded by family, not fighting for my place in it. But when my own son told me I had no meaning in his house, something inside me broke. I stayed silent in that moment. But what I did next proved that he was wrong. Dead wrong. My name is Frank Williams, and I'm 75 years old. I spent most of my life working with my hands. 40 years at a manufacturing plant, building engines, sweating through long shifts to keep food on the table and my family provided for. I wasn't rich, but I was steady, reliable, the kind of man people could count on. When my wife, Linda, passed away 6 years ago, the house we had shared for decades felt unbearably empty. The sound of her laugh, the clink of her teacup on the kitchen counter, the warmth of her presence, it was all gone in a heartbeat. The silence after her death was the hardest thing I'd ever faced. So when my son, Michael, invited me to live with him and his family, I thought it was a blessing. He had a nice suburban home in Illinois with his wife, Susan, and their teenage daughter, Amanda. I imagined laughter around the dinner table. Maybe a chance to help Amanda with her school projects, or sit on the porch with Michael like we used to when he was a boy. For the first few weeks, I tried to stay out of the way. I woke early, brewed my coffee, and sat quietly in the corner of the kitchen, reading the newspaper while Susan bustled about preparing for work. I mowed the lawn when I could, fixed the squeaky steps, and even replaced a broken hinge on their back door. It felt good to still be useful. But slowly, I began to notice a shift. Susan sighed whenever she saw me in the kitchen, as if my presence was an inconvenience. Amanda barely looked up from her phone. And Michael, my son, my only child, was always too busy, too distracted, too distant. One evening, I overheard Susan's sharp whisper in the living room. "Your father's always around, Michael. It feels like we have no space anymore. This is our home, not his." Michael's reply stung even more. "I know, Susan, but he's old. What else is he going to do? Just try to ignore him." I sat there on the other side of the wall, my chest tightening. Ignore me, as if I were a piece of worn-out furniture shoved into the corner. Still, I said nothing. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. We were sitting at the dinner table. Susan had cooked. Amanda was scrolling on her phone, and I tried to make small talk about the baseball game I had watched earlier. Michael sighed heavily, set down his fork, and looked me straight in the eye. "Dad, you need to understand something. You have no meaning in this house. You're just here. That's it." The words hung in the air like a heavy stone dropped into water. Susan froze. Amanda glanced up, and I felt my heart slam against my ribs. My own son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had worked myself half to death for, had just told me I had no meaning in his life. I wanted to speak, to yell, to remind him of the nights I worked overtime so he could go to college, of the mornings I sat through his baseball games, rain or shine, of the sacrifices Linda and I made so he could have a better future. But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat, lowered my eyes to my plate, and stayed silent. Inside, though, a storm was building, because Michael was wrong. I had meaning, and I would show him, quietly, patiently, but unmistakably, that dismissing me was the biggest mistake of his life. The day after Michael's words, the house felt colder. Every creak of the floorboards, every glance from Susan, every sigh from Amanda, it all carried a weight I couldn't ignore anymore. I tried to shake it off, telling myself Michael had been stressed, maybe tired from work, maybe careless with his words. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I made coffee as usual. Susan walked in, her heels clicking on the tile. She glanced at the mug in my hand and frowned. "Frank, you shouldn't be drinking the last of the coffee. Michael likes to take a thermos to work." I stared at her, surprised. "I can brew another pot." She sighed, as if my very existence required too much effort. "Never mind. Just try to be considerate." I nodded, swallowing the sting. Later that week, I caught Amanda in the living room with her friends. They were laughing at something on her phone when she gestured toward me as I walked by. "That's my grandpa. He just sits around all day. Doesn't do much." The girls giggled. My cheeks burned, but I kept moving, retreating to the guest room that had become more prison than sanctuary. Still, I tried to help. I fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom, trimmed the hedges outside, and even repaired Amanda's bike when I noticed a chain slipping. She didn't thank me. She just rolled her eyes and said, "Cool, I guess." But the worst moments came from Michael himself. One evening, he came home later than usual. I was in the living room watching a rerun of a Western I loved, John Wayne, steady and strong, the kind of man I'd admired all my life. Michael walked in, dropped his briefcase, and frowned at the screen. "Dad, you have to watch this old stuff? Amanda hates it when you hog the TV." I lowered the volume. "It's just one show, son. I can switch after it's done." He shook his head. "No, Dad, this isn't your house. You don't get to decide." Those words cut deeper than I could show. So I stood, turned off the TV, and shuffled back to my room. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. The words kept echoing. "You have no meaning in this house. This isn't your house." But hadn't I given him everything? When he was young, we had so little. I patched his shoes with tape until payday. I skipped meals so he could eat. I worked double shifts so he could have a shot at college. And now, in the twilight of my life, I was treated like baggage. The days that followed only proved the pattern. Susan began rearranging the kitchen cabinets, moving my mugs and plates into boxes. "You don't really need all these things, Frank. We're trying to declutter." Declutter. That was the word she used for erasing the remnants of my life. Michael started making comments, too. Little digs disguised as concern. "Dad, maybe you'd be happier in the senior community. You'd have friends your age, people to play cards with. Doesn't that sound better than being cooped up here?" I smiled weakly, though my hands clenched under the table. "I'll think about it." But in my heart, I knew what was happening. They weren't suggesting I was being pushed. Slowly, quietly, they were squeezing me out of the home I thought would shelter me. I said nothing, but I watched. I listened. I remembered. And every slight, every whisper, every cruel glance became another nail in the coffin of my silence. Because I wasn't just enduring anymore. I was waiting for the right moment to show them that they were wrong about me, that I wasn't meaningless, that I still had more power than they could ever imagine. It was a rainy Friday evening when the truth hit me harder than ever. I was sitting alone in the guest room, listening to the muffled laughter from the living room. Michael, Susan, and Amanda were eating takeout, talking loudly, enjoying themselves. No one had bothered to call me down to join. I could smell the fried chicken, the biscuits, the mashed potatoes, my favorite meal, but no plate had been saved for me. I sat there with a can of soup, eating in silence, and realized something that chilled me to my bones. I wasn't part of their family anymore. I was just a shadow in their house. Later that night, I heard Susan's voice drifting through the thin walls. "Michael, this isn't working. Your father's too set in his ways. We can't keep taking care of him. He's dead weight." Michael sighed. "I know. I'm looking into options. Maybe a retirement home. He can sell his old house and cover the costs. That way, he won't be our problem." I froze. Problem. That's what I had become to my own son. I sat on the edge of the bed, trembling with rage and sorrow. The man who once begged me to teach him how to ride a bike, who cried when he scraped his knees, who leaned on me for guidance, now saw me as a problem to dispose of. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling the same truth. If I did nothing, I would lose everything. My independence, my dignity, my identity. They'd pack me up like an old box in the attic and send me away. By dawn, the sorrow inside me had hardened into resolve. I rose early, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table alone. For years, I had told myself that family was everything, that enduring their slights was better than being alone. But now I saw it clearly. Family wasn't blood. Family was loyalty, love, and respect. And if they couldn't offer me that, then they didn't deserve the sacrifices I had made. I wasn't powerless. Not by a long shot. I still had my savings from decades of work. I still had my name on the deed to my old house, the place I had rented out after Linda died. I had friends from the plant, neighbors who respected me, and a reputation for being fair but firm. Most of all, I still had my mind, and I would use it. My plan began to take shape. First, I would bide my time. Let them keep thinking I was weak, helpless, dependent. Their arrogance would make them blind. Second, I would reclaim my independence quietly. I'd check on my old house, make arrangements with a lawyer, and secure everything in my name. They wouldn't get their hands on a single penny of my savings or square inch of property. And third, the most important part, I would show Michael what true meaning looked like. He thought I was worthless? Then I'd prove my worth in the most undeniable way possible, by building a life beyond his control. As I sipped my coffee, a slow smile spread across my face. For weeks, I had been silent, shrinking under their contempt. But not anymore. The storm inside me had settled into something sharper, determination. When Michael came downstairs that morning yawning, he barely glanced at me. "Dad, we'll talk later about that retirement place. It's for the best." I looked him in the eye for the first time in weeks and simply said, "We'll see." He smirked, thinking I was caving. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a plan, one that would remind my son that I was far from meaningless. And when the time came, he'd regret every word he had spoken. The very next day, I put my plan into motion. It began quietly, without any grand gestures, just the deliberate steps of a man who'd had enough of being overlooked. After breakfast, when Susan and Amanda went shopping and Michael disappeared into his office for work, I slipped out of the house. The rain from the night before had cleared, leaving the air cool and fresh. I walked to the bus stop, my cane tapping steadily against the pavement, and headed downtown. My first stop was a lawyer's office. Mr. Parker, a sharp but kind man in his 50s, greeted me warmly. "Frank, it's been a while. What brings you in today?" I sat across from him, my hands folded but steady. "I need to make some changes. My son and his wife, they've been pushing me to sell my house, move into assisted living. I want to make sure they can't touch a single thing I've worked for." He nodded, his expression turning serious. "We can set up protections. Put your assets in a trust. Designate beneficiaries you choose. Do you want them included?" I looked him straight in the eye. "No, not a penny. Everything goes to charity or to the people who actually stood by me. I'll make the list." For the next hour, we went through documents, drafting and signing where needed. By the time I left, my old house was secured under my name alone. My savings were tied up in a trust, and my will was updated so that not one cent would land in Michael's hands. Step 1, complete. Next, I stopped by my old house. The tenants had recently moved out, and the property manager still had the keys. When I stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards nearly brought me to tears. Dust lingered on the windowsills, and the air was stale, but it was mine. I walked through each room, touching the walls Linda and I had painted together, the cabinets I had built by hand. Memories filled the space. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, quiet evenings. This house wasn't just a building. It was proof of my life, my meaning. I decided then and there that I would move back, not just to reclaim my independence, but to reclaim myself. That evening, I returned to Michael's house before they noticed I was gone. At dinner, Susan complained about the mess in the garage and how I always left tools lying around. Amanda laughed and said, "Grandpa doesn't even know what to do with tools anymore." I bit my tongue, but inside I smiled. If only they knew how wrong they were. The following week, I visited the bank. I met with a manager I'd known for decades. "Mr. Williams," she said, "how can we help you today?" "I need to update my accounts." I told her, new protections. No one but me should be able to withdraw or make changes. And I'd like to set up automatic donations to the Veterans Home and the local food bank. By the time I left, everything was arranged. Michael and Susan could demand all they wanted, but they would never get their hands on my money. Back at the house, I continued to play my part. I acted tired, helpless, even forgetful at times. I let them believe they were winning. Susan kept whispering about retirement homes. Michael kept bringing up financial planning. They thought I was a lamb being led to the slaughter. But every night, when I sat alone in the guest room, I reviewed my documents, my keys, my plan. The foundation was set. The day would come soon when I would leave their house, not as a broken old man, but as someone who had outsmarted them all. And when Michael finally learned the truth, that the father he dismissed as meaningless had outplayed him at every turn, it would shatter the arrogance he wore like armor. My silence was almost over. The next move would be mine. Once the papers were signed and my assets locked down, I knew it was time to take the next step. Planning was one thing, but action was what would finally prove I wasn't meaningless. The opportunity came when Susan cornered me in the kitchen one morning. She was holding a brochure for a retirement facility, all glossy photos of smiling seniors playing cards and eating bland meals. She laid it on the counter, like she was offering me a gift. "Frank, this place is perfect," she said sweetly. "They'll take care of you there. You'll have friends, activities, and we'll be able to focus on our own household. It's what's best for everyone." I studied the brochure, nodding slowly, hiding the fire burning inside me. "It looks nice," I murmured. "Let me think about it." She smiled satisfied and walked away. But what she didn't know was that I had already decided where I was going, and it wasn't a retirement home. The very next day, I slipped out again and headed to my old house. The property manager had already begun cleaning it up, and when I walked the front door, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The dust and cobwebs didn't matter. The peeling paint didn't matter. This was home. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. Each day, while Michael was at the office and Susan ran errands, I snuck over to the house. I scrubbed the floors, aired out the rooms, and polished the old wooden banisters Linda had loved so much. With every stroke of the cloth, I felt my strength returning. I even visited a furniture store and bought a new recliner, a sturdy bed, and a simple dining set. The delivery men carried them in without asking questions. And by the end of the week, the house looked alive again. Step by step, I was reclaiming my life. Meanwhile, back at Michael's, I kept up the act. I shuffled slowly through the halls, pretended to forget where I left my glasses, and let Susan talk down to me as though I were already halfway gone. Michael brought up the retirement home again at dinner, his tone firm. "Dad, we've made some calls. They've got a room ready for you. We'll help you pack this weekend." I nodded, playing a part. "If you think that's what's best." He relaxed, relief washing over his face. He had no idea he was walking straight into my trap. That weekend, while they made lists of what I should take to the facility, I was busy moving boxes into my old house. Clothes, tools, keepsakes. Everything I cared about was already there. All that remained at Michael's was what I didn't mind leaving behind. On Sunday afternoon, Susan walked into the guest room holding a suitcase. "Frank, start packing. They'll want you settled in tomorrow." I smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Susan. I've already packed." She blinked, confused, but said nothing. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the dark and whispered to myself, "Tomorrow they'll see." The next morning, I rose early, put on my best shirt, and carried the last of my things to the car I'd rented. By the time Michael came downstairs, the guest room was empty. "Dad?" he called, peering into the room. "Where's your stuff?" I was already driving away, the sun rising over familiar streets that led back to my real home. When I pulled into the driveway, I felt tears prick my eyes. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living on my own terms. The house was mine. My money was safe. My plan was in motion. And soon, Michael would learn the truth. The father he called meaningless had more power than he ever imagined. By the time Michael realized what had happened, I was already settled back into my old house. The lawn was trimmed, the curtains drawn open, and the smell of fresh paint hung in the air. My recliner sat by the window. My tools were neatly arranged in the garage, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. I knew it wouldn't take long for Michael to come storming in, and I was right. 3 days later, I heard the screech of tires outside. Michael's car pulled into the driveway, and seconds later, the front door burst open without so much as a knock. Susan trailed behind him, her face pale but angry. "Dad!" Michael barked. What the hell is this? We went to your room, and it was empty. You just disappeared? I sat calmly in my recliner, sipping coffee. I didn't disappear. I came home. Home. Susan's voice was sharp. This place is falling apart. You can't live here. You need supervision. I set my cup down and looked at them both steadily. I've lived here most of my life. I built half of these shelves with my own 2 hands. I don't need supervision. I need respect. Something I never got in your house. Michael ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Dad, this isn't safe. You should have talked to us first. We were trying to help you. I leaned forward, my voice steady but edged with steel. Help me? When I asked for a plate of food, I was ignored. When I tried to join a conversation, I was dismissed. When I needed kindness, you called me a burden. That wasn't help, Michael. That was cruelty. Susan crossed her arms. We only want what's best for you. I stood, my shoulders squared, the strength of years returning to me. No, you wanted what was best for yourselves. You wanted me out of the way. You wanted to sell this house, pocket the money, and dump me in some facility where I'd rot quietly. Michael's face reddened. That's not true. It is, I said firmly, and I let you believe I was weak. I let you think I had no meaning, no fight left in me. But you were wrong. I've already spoken to my lawyer. This house is secured in my name. My savings are protected. And when my time comes, none of it will go to you. The words hit them like a hammer. Susan gasped, covering her mouth. Michael's fists clenched at his sides. What do you mean, none of it? He asked through gritted teeth. I mean exactly that, I said, my voice calm. Every penny will go to causes that matter, veterans, food banks, scholarships in your mother's name, to people who will appreciate it. You and Susan will get nothing, because you showed me what I meant to you. Nothing. Susan's eyes filled with tears, but not from guilt, only anger. You can't do this to your own children. I stepped closer, looking her dead in the eye. You stopped being my children the moment you treated me like a burden instead of a father. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. Respect does. And you gave me neither. Michael's jaw worked furiously, but he had no words. For the first time, he looked small in front of me, stripped of the arrogance he had wielded so easily. Now, I said, pointing to the door, get out of my house. The silence stretched. Finally, Michael grabbed Susan's arm and muttered, This isn't over. Yes, it is. I replied, my voice final. They stormed out, slamming the door behind them. The house shook, but my heart was steady. I walked back to my recliner, sat down, and picked up my coffee. The walls around me felt stronger than ever, not because of wood and nails, but because they now held my resolve. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of losing my place. I had reclaimed it, and they knew it, after Michael and Susan stormed out my house. Slamming the door so hard the glass rattled, silence filled the rooms. But this time, it wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was liberating. For weeks I had been treated like baggage, a shadow in my own son's house. Now, standing in my living room with sunlight pouring across the floor, I felt something I hadn't in years, freedom. I spent the next few days unpacking properly, hanging my old photographs back on the walls. There was Linda in her Sunday dress, smiling at me on our wedding day. There was little Michael in his baseball uniform, grinning with missing front teeth. The memories brought both ache and comfort, but they reminded me of the truth. My life had meaning. Every nail I drove into these walls, every sacrifice I made, every smile I shared with Linda, it all meant something. I wasn't meaningless. I never had been. Neighbors stopped by once they saw me back in the house. Mr. Harris from down the street shook my hand firmly. Good to see you back where you belong, Frank. Place looks alive again. Mrs. Doyle brought a casserole. It's too quiet on this block without you, dear. Don't you go leaving us again. Their kindness filled the void my own family had left behind. It struck me then that sometimes the family you choose, or the community that chooses you, means more than blood ever could. I didn't cut Michael and Susan completely out of my thoughts. I'm human. I still felt the sting. Sometimes late at night, I wondered if Michael would regret his words, if he'd ever realize what he threw away. But I also knew I couldn't live my life waiting for an apology that might never come. Instead, I poured myself into new routines. I joined a local veterans group, something I'd put off for years. I spent my mornings at the community center, playing cards with men my age, sharing stories, and even fixing up a few broken chairs in their rec room. The satisfaction of using my hands again, of being useful, was more healing than I imagined. I also started volunteering at the library on weekends, reading to children during story hour. Their eager faces lit up as I brought characters to life. When one little boy hugged me after reading and said, "You're my favorite storyteller," I felt a swell of pride deeper than anything I'd felt in Michael's house. This was meaning. Meanwhile, the financial protections I'd put in place gave me peace. I knew my house and savings were safe. More importantly, I knew they would carry on Linda's legacy long after I was gone. Scholarships, food banks, veterans' homes, all of it tied to our names. That was something Michael could never take away. Weeks later, Michael did call once. His voice was stiff, his words clipped. "Dad, we didn't mean for things to get so heated. Maybe we should talk." I paused, then answered honestly, "Michael, I'll always be your father, but respect goes both ways. Until you understand that, there's nothing more to say." He didn't call again. It hurt, yes, but it also set me free, because I realized I didn't need his validation anymore. I had already proven my worth, to myself, to my community, to the memory of Linda. One quiet evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of fresh-cut grass. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I did it, Linda. I found my place again." In that moment, I felt her presence, not as an ache, but as comfort. And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't meaningless. I was a man who had lived, loved, sacrificed, and fought to keep his dignity. And that, more than anything my son could ever say, gave my life true meaning. It had been 2 months since the confrontation. The sharpness of Michael's words, "You have no meaning in this house," no longer haunted me the way it once had. Instead, those words had become fuel, pushing me toward a life I never thought I'd find again. My days were full now. I spent mornings tending the garden Linda once adored. Rows of tomatoes, beans, and roses grew where weeds had once taken over. Neighbors often stopped by, leaning over the fence to compliment the blooms. "Frank, your roses are the pride of the block," Mrs. Doyle told me one morning. Her smile reminded me that appreciation still existed, even if it didn't come from my own son. Afternoons were for the community center. I taught a group of retirees basic woodworking, how to sand, carve, and polish small projects. Watching their faces light up when they created something with their own hands gave me a satisfaction that Susan's sighs and Amanda's eye rolls never could. I even fixed a broken bench in the park, and a group of kids cheered when they sat on again without fear of falling. Meanwhile, word about Michael and Susan began trickling back to me. Small towns always talked. Daniel Harris, an old friend from church, mentioned it first. "Frank, I heard Michael lost his job. Something about cuts at the firm. Tough break." Not long after, Mrs. Collins whispered across the fence, "I saw Susan at the grocery store using coupons. Looked like she'd been crying." I didn't rejoice in their struggles. Despite everything, they were still my family. But I couldn't help but notice the cruel twist of fate. While they had tried to strip me of dignity, they were now the ones scrambling, grasping for stability. One evening, Amanda came to my door. She stood awkwardly, her phone in hand, looking smaller than I remembered. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "Mom and Dad are struggling. They said you won't talk to them, but I just wanted to see you." I invited her in. We sat at the table, and I poured her a glass of lemonade. She looked around the house, her eyes lingering on the photos of Linda and me. "It feels warm here," she said softly. "Home should feel that way," I replied. For the next hour, we talked. Not about money, not about blame, but about her school, her dreams, her friends. She listened as I told her stories about her dad as a boy, about the summers he spent fishing with me. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope, that maybe the cycle of greed and dismissal could be broken with her. But when she left, she added, "Dad and Mom won't be happy I came. Please don't tell them." Her words cut deep. It reminded me how poison things had become in Michael's house. That night, sitting on the porch, I looked at the stars and whispered, "Linda, I can't fix them, but maybe I can reach her." And so I poured more energy into Amanda. I attended her school play, sitting proudly in the audience. I helped her with a history project, teaching her about tools used in the old days. Slowly, she began to see me not as the old man who just sat around, but as someone with wisdom, patience, and yes, meaning. Meanwhile, Michael tried calling again. This time, his voice wasn't angry, it was weary. "Dad, things aren't easy right now. Maybe we could talk." I thought about it long and hard. Finally, I said, "Michael, my door is open, but if you step through it, you leave your arrogance behind. Respect comes first. Without it, there's nothing." There was silence on the line before he muttered, "I'll think about it." I set the phone down and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, I wasn't desperate for his approval. I had built a life that mattered, with or without him. As I sat in the glow of the setting sun, the laughter of children echoing from the park, I realized something profound. My son had tried to erase my meaning, but in standing up, in reclaiming my life, I had found more meaning than ever before. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.